Santa Fe, New Mexico. So I think we may still be on the same time zone, and
Oh, yeah.
we're actually filming episodes for an ancient civilizations TV series, and so that's what you're seeing in the set behind me here.
Oh,
So I
awesome.
just want, before we begin, so the sound is okay and the picture is okay, and we're ready to go.
We're ready to go.
All
So
right.
by way of introduction, I'm sure that most people here actually already know who you are, but we're here today with Gregg Braden. He's a 5-time New York Times bestselling author, scientist, international educator, and he's renowned as a pioneer in the emerging paradigm based in science, social policy, and human potential. And we're here today because he wrote the introduction and also a chapter for a book called Our Moment of Choice, which is an incredible book, and everybody should go check it out. It has some really incredible chapters written by all sorts of experts. And yeah, we're just really excited to talk to you about specifically about where humans and civilization is going from here, because I think, you know, you write about this being a really important moment in time where we have been really separate for all of civilization, and we need to come together. So I'd love to start actually just by understanding your personal journey a little bit better, because I am personally fascinated with where you started and where you've ended up.
Well, that's you know, that could be a big story. How far back do you want me to go? Which facet of the journey are you interested in?
Well, you started as a geologist, right? And you worked as a scientist, and
Yeah.
and also I actually don't know when you did this, but you wrote about the polarity of the Earth changing soon, which I think is super fascinating. Anyway, we could go down. That's a whole rabbit hole. That's like maybe not good for
Yeah.
this talk,
So
but
I'm a scientist. I'm a degreed earth scientist with a strong background. I'm a geologist. I started out in marine biology, that transferred to marine geology, that transferred to terrestrial geology, with a strong background in life sciences, so molecular biology and cellular biology, math science, or math, physics, computer science, and archaeology. And I say that, Tegan, because it helps me as a scientist to stay current with new discoveries that are happening so quickly now. You know, the peer-reviewed scientific journals, many of them, they publish monthly, and the discoveries are coming so quickly that they are now supplementing the monthly publication with a weekly publication, because our technology is advancing so quickly. So that's my background. And the new discoveries have helped us to change the way that we think about ourselves and our relationship to the world. The bottom line for me is they are changing the human story. This is important. It's more than a philosophical concept. It's more than, you know, an academic conversation, because we live our lives based upon the way we've been taught to think about ourselves. We solve our problems every day in our lives as individuals, between nations. We solve our problems based upon our story. We choose our relationships. You know, every relationship, every friendship, every partnership, our most intimate relationships are based upon the way we think about ourselves. We heal our bodies, we create social policies, and we enact laws, all based upon the way that we've been taught to think about ourselves. And from my perspective, this is up for civilization. It's up for humanity right now, because the world is changing, and that's no secret. You know, my world is changing. Everyone who's watching, their world is changing. And because the world is changing, we're being forced to think differently to solve our problems, the way that we thought even a year ago. While it may have worked for us a year ago, and I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm saying when the world changes, we need to update our thinking. And the science is on our side. Science gives us a reason to do just that. And interestingly, many of the new discoveries in science parallel our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions as well. Not religion, but spirituality, in the sense of our relationship to the earth, our relationship to our body, our relationship to the cosmos, to one another. And as we bring all of this together, what I think one of the things we're finding, Tegan, is that the boundaries that have separated the ways that we know ourselves, the sciences, are becoming very fuzzy now. How can you separate physics from chemistry? Or how can you separate human emotion from biology? Because we now know that every emotion that we experience changes the chemistry and the biology in our bodies, all the way to the genetic level and even lower. So where do you draw the line? And for me, it's been said that the 20th century was the century of discovery. You know, we learned about the double helix of DNA, and we learned about the elements and the cosmos, and we discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls and our relationship to the past. The 21st century, I think the question is, what do we do with everything we discovered? And what we're finding is that the world doesn't fit into those boxes. There's a world out there, and I think we owe it, I personally believe that we owe it to ourselves to draw up on every iota of wisdom, honoring the traditions, whether it's ancient indigenous oral tradition or whether it is rock solid science coming from peer-reviewed journals. It's all telling us something about ourselves. And I think this is where we have an evolutionary edge that our ancestors did not necessarily have, is that we have the ability to gather that information into a story, a new story, an empowering story of hope and possibility, extraordinary potential based on honest, truthful and factual information that allows us to transcend. So we don't want to just survive what's happening in our world. We want to transcend, become the best versions of ourselves and create the best possible world. The book that you're talking about, that's what that book is all about. Interestingly, that book was written before COVID ever happened, and it was published just in the window of the COVID emergence. So I think it's no experience that happened that way. So that's, I didn't really talk about my past that much, but I wanted to lay the foundation for the work. My work as a scientist, people ask me often, Greg, how did you make what they perceive as a quantum leap from the world of science and technology, what I'm doing now? And, you know, I honestly have to tell you, it was never a quantum leap for me. It was more of a logical progression. And the truth, I'll just share with you, the deep truth is that I was working as a senior computer systems designer in the defense industry during the Cold War years, working on a project that was called SDI, Star Wars Defense Initiative, high-tech stuff. By day, this is what I was doing. And at nights and on the weekends, I had always searched our past through, I'm an amateur archaeologist, I'm a scholar, and I believe, Tegan, that those who have come before us, our ancestors, left something for us in the past. If we know how to recognize it in our time, that it will help us to transcend the differences that have led to the wars, such as the war that I was working in, the Cold War. And so I made that transition to go from the corporate expression of technology into a deeper technology of consciousness, but to do it as an independent scientist, because the structure of the world has been led to discount the wisdom of the past. And I said, what if our ancestors, are they old? Yeah. Are they obsolete? No. What if we can learn from them? And that's not a message that's supported in the scientific community in terms of the things that we're talking about. So my journey has been to find the wisdom of the best science of the modern world and the wisdom of our past that does just that helps us to become the best versions of ourselves, so that maybe war becomes obsolete in our lifetimes. And if that changes, a whole lot of other things change as well. So long answer to a short question, but it gives us a platform that we can launch from today.
Definitely. I think it's so interesting to hear your journey, and I agree with you. The two shouldn't be separate. It's, you know, you talk about unity thinking, and that applies not just to people or to how we connect with the earth, but also how we connect our own stories together. So I think it makes total sense. I'd love to talk a little bit about, I've gotten a few questions that have been sent in over email from different attendees, and people are all really interested in the idea of transhumanism. And I'm not sure if that's because we're in this moment right now of fear around our own biology because of coronavirus. But people want to talk about it. So maybe you could give a definition of transhumanism and maybe relate it to our immunity and some different things like mirror neurons and how that all can apply to us in this COVID impacted world.
So we're going to really dive into a light conversation, I can tell. No, it's up for everybody, maybe not with these words. You may not be hearing the language in the mainstream, but these principles are up for us right now. So for those who may not be familiar, there is a movement, and it is a subcurrent in some cultures that is more pronounced outside of the United States and outside of the West. But certainly in other cultures, it is much more pronounced. Transhumanism is based upon the story that we have been taught, the way we've been led to think about ourselves. So the transhumanism believes that we are the product of random mutations, we're the product of lucky biology, and that while we seem to function okay relatively in day-to-day life, that we need something outside of ourselves to become the best versions of ourselves. Now, there are different levels of transhumanism. We're experiencing one level right now, the first level, where the technology has advanced to the point where we can replace parts of our biology with machines and AI. And I want to be really clear. I'm not saying it's wrong, but you'll see as we get into this conversation where it becomes a slippery slope. Right now, we are doing that. We've got artificial cornea implants, artificial heart valves, artificial joints. Many people watching probably have artificial hip joints, titanium, and things like that. So that is one level of transhumanism. The next level is the technology is pushing, and there are organizations and there are policies that are being enacted by some governments that believe that the human body is so weak and fragile and frail that ultimately the body must be replaced with technology. So rather than replacing things that are wearing out, they're talking about a human brain being placed into a machine, essentially. That's a second level of transhumanism. The third level, and this is the science fiction stuff, but you've seen it in mainstream news, there are some scientists that believe that consciousness is nothing more than little pluses and minuses, ones and zeros in electrical circuits. And they believe that the consciousness of an individual can be stored on a computer chip, so that when that individual dies, that consciousness can then be downloaded into either an artificial body or another physical human body. And in that way, they've achieved immortality. So these are kind of the three levels of the transhuman movement. Now, I'll just share with you from my perspective where this becomes a slippery slope. We've all heard the expression, use it or lose it. And that is certainly true in biology. And what we know is that when we stop using biological components of our body begins to say, hey, maybe we don't need that. Especially true with neurons and neural connections and ways of thinking. So, for example, there are computer chips that are now available to implant into the human brain that connect the brain directly to the hard drive or a flash drive or the cloud of a computer with no keyboard. Now, when I talk about this in audiences with young people that have not been taught to appreciate the extraordinary sacredness and the potential and the rarity of the human body, when those young people hear that they could interface with a game without using a keyboard, what they say is sweet. Hey, who wouldn't want that, But what we're beginning to understand is what we choose to do in one generation. If one generation, I'm just using this as an example, there are many examples we could use. If one generation chooses to accept computer chips into their brain to interface with their computers, that means there are neurons in their brain that they're not using. And in that generation, maybe it's no big deal, but then the next generation, the body says maybe these neurons become obsolete. And we are only beginning, Tegan, to understand our neural capacity. There have been new classes of neurons that were only discovered in 2019. You know, we don't know everything. There's a new class of neurons discovered in the heart only recently. Our heart has its own neural network. That stuff's not being taught in the universities. It's not being taught in the medical schools. So the question is, if we embrace the technology and we lose aspects of our humanness, how much of ourselves are we willing to give away to the technology? And my question is, how can we answer that until we know what we're giving away? How can we know how much technology to embrace until we understand the potential of who we are? That's the crux of my work and so many others that are doing such a beautiful job. Now, I want to be, I know this brings up a lot of emotion. For some people, it's a very slippery slope. I'm going to be really clear. I am not anti-technology. I am happy that that technology is there and there are places for it. And I'll give you a perfect example. I just read an article recently of a soldier in Afghanistan. An IED took both of his legs and one of his arms. And he was married and he had a family. And because of the technology that we're talking about, he now has prosthetics. He's got artificial limbs that are operated from the chips in his brain, and he can hug his children. He can brush his own teeth. He can even play the piano again. And that is, I mean, I could almost cry, but then my voice would change and it's a different program that we're, a different interview. But so it's the technology, this is always been the crux of the scientific conversation. I've been a scientist most of my adult life, and the scientific question, there's one way of thinking that says, because we can do something, we should. And there's another way of thinking that says, just because we can, maybe we have to think about how we apply this in our lives. So the fact that technology is not right, wrong, good, or bad. It's how we choose to embrace that technology. And the story that says that we're the product of random mutations, accidental biology, that we're weak and powerless, and that we need something outside of ourselves to be at our best. That story is what's driving the transhuman movement. Here's the irony. All the technology, I have to tell you, I worked in the high-tech world, space-based lasers, radar, and this was during the Cold War in the 80s and in the early 90s. So imagine where it is now. I've seen amazing technology, and to this moment right now, I have yet to see any technology built outside of our bodies that does not mimic what we already do in the cells of our bodies, except we do it better if we give ourselves what our bodies need to be at their best. So here's what I mean by that. I know it's a big statement. People they tend to think of technology in terms of chips, wires, and chemicals. We are what is called soft technology. So we're not chips, wires, and chemicals. We are cell membranes and neurons and ion potentials across cell walls. That is a very sophisticated, highly advanced technology. And the operating system, we self-regulate through thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs, breath, focus, precisely the core of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions. So as we attempt to mimic in the technology what we already do, and this is up for us with vaccines. A vaccine that you take from an external technology, it is mimicking and trying to enhance what our bodies have done since we appeared on Earth 200,000 years ago. The scientists are in total agreement of the date. We, anatomically modern humans, us, we showed up mysteriously on Earth 200,000 years ago, fully intact, fully enabled. We didn't develop these capabilities and potentials slowly, gradually over long periods of time. When modern humans showed up, we had these capabilities, and the mystery is we haven't changed in those 200,000 years. In body, our consciousness certainly is evolving. But when you look at our DNA today, and you compare our DNA to the DNA that we're now able to extract from the bone marrow of the fossilized remains of the beings that are supposed to be our ancestors, what we find is those beings are not our ancestors. And as far back as anatomically modern humans go, their DNA and our DNA, it's the same DNA. We haven't changed. So there's a whole conversation we could have about how that happened and why it happened. But the fact is that we are wired to adapt. We're wired to transcend the great challenges that life brings to our doorstep. And the way to do that is to embrace the deep truth of our humanness. Transhumanism is challenging our humanness. And if we go that transhuman route, how much of our extraordinary potential will be lost forever? And I think that's the question. It's not a philosophical question because the technology now exists.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the, prosthetics, if you actually just take that as an example, it's so interesting when you think about how long we've been using prosthetics. And, people think about like, oh, a prosthetic leg or a prosthetic arm. Like I don't have experience with that, but most people, I don't know what the percentage is, have experience with contact lenses or glasses. That's a prosthetic. We've been using them for hundreds of years. You can also extend back into, hundreds of thousands of years ago when we started to use tools. I'm not sure whether there's evidence of humans using tools actually changing the way that our brains work. I'm sure that that the use of tools and prosthetics have also created new pathways and not just destroyed them. So I think that's all. It's really interesting. I think one thing that that a lot of people are writing into in the chat. And by the way, everyone who's on here, if you make sure that you have the little blue thing say all panelists and attendees, that means that everyone can read what you're writing. So we're getting a lot of messages that are coming just to us and we can't answer them, but it'd be great if you're having a discussion with each other. But we're having a lot of people ask about how spirituality intersects with all of this, and how humanness and spirituality are connected.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And so I'm going to make a distinction between spirituality and religion, because for many people, even people in the New Thought community, they often interchange or confuse the two. In its purest sense, spirituality is about relationships. It's about our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to other people, our relationship to the earth, our relationship to the cosmos, our relationship to the forces of nature, our relationship to time and the future and the past. So in its purest sense, spirituality is about our relationship to the world that we live in across those domains. Those traditions, spirituality, in one form or another, have been around for a very, very long time. They predate religion. Religion came along later and began to wrap the rules and the dogma around spiritual principles. And in doing so, the religions began to lead people to feel separate from themselves, separate from one another, separate from the earth, separate from a higher power, separate from the cosmos, and powerless and needing someone else to intervene on their behalf. I'm not saying it's right, wrong, good, or bad. I'm saying this is the path. This is where it's gone. So the religions serve a powerful social purpose. The religions bring people together in community, and that can be a good thing. The question is, what do we do in that community? So that could be the topic of a whole conversation. Where the transhumanism and spirituality and our story all come together is the world is changing faster than we can document it in our classrooms or our textbooks. We all know that. And because the world is changing, we've got to change the way that we think. about ourselves and one another, we've got to change our story. And what we're being invited to do is update our story to a story that is truthful, honest, and factual. The science is helping us to understand the nuts and the bolts. Science helps us to understand our relationship between emotion and neurons and the chemistry in our body and the physical reality. Science doesn't always know how to apply those relationships. I meet with scientists all the time and they say, okay, yeah, there's a field that connects all things. What do we do with that field? So that's the scientific world. The spiritual traditions have not been so concerned about the science. They've been more concerned about the applications. So, for example, perfect example, for 300 years, scientists were struggling with the question, are we connected or are we separate? Is there a field of energy that underlies all of existence, including us? For 300 years, and only recently with the CERN superconducting super collider in Switzerland and France, the big machine that found and confirmed scientifically that field. Now scientists say, okay, there's a field out there. What do we do with it? On the other hand, for 5,000 years, spiritual traditions, they weren't trying to prove the field. They assumed that it existed. And so they didn't spend 5,000 years trying to prove its existence. They have dedicated 5,000 years to how we interact with that field and how we can embrace and access that field to help our better lives and help us to become better people and create a better world. This is a beautiful place where science and spirituality can come together, because the science says these relationships exist, but we don't know what to do with them. The spiritual traditions say, here is how we apply these in our lives. And if we can transcend the arrogance and the judgment that I've seen in the scientific community, to humble ourselves and say, hey, maybe our ancestors were onto something. They weren't necessarily scientists, but man, they understood these relationships. What can we learn from them? This is where we build a wisdom that's greater than the science by itself, and it's greater than the spirituality by itself. And this is, I think, the opportunity that we have right now to build upon the foundation of the best science of the modern world in 5,000 plus years of human experience. Stop judging them, bring them together. What can we learn? What works? And if it works, let's do more of it. What doesn't work? If it doesn't work, let's stop putting our energy into it. And build from that a new way of thinking about ourselves. This is the new human story. And we need this right now. Our lives depend upon this. What used to be an academic conversation about the immune response, now our lives, our very lives, depend upon this. And Tegan, it's interesting, all you're hearing in mainstream is that we need something outside of ourselves to help us to feel safe in the world. Rarely, there are some exceptions, but rarely are we hearing about the intelligence of the body and how to support and strengthen the intelligence of our existence, the way we've done for 200,000 years, to help us. The tendency is to blame something outside of ourselves and then to find a savior outside of ourselves. We're always conditioned to think that way. That's the old story. The new story says that we are extraordinary, beautiful, magnificent, powerful beings of extraordinary potential. And I could open the door to a whole conversation, but I have to tell you right now, the best science of the modern world has overturned Darwin's ideas for how we got here. So I'm a scientist, I'm a geologist. I'm not a denier. I believe in evolution. I've seen it in the fossil record. Many plants, many animals, many insects. The story of evolution works for ancient forms of life. It breaks down when it comes to humans 200,000 years ago. Because 200,000 years ago, we underwent a series of mutations in our DNA that happened so close together. They didn't happen slowly, gradually over long periods of time. They happened quickly. They happened right around that 200,000 year mark. and they give us our extraordinary potentials. These are DNA fusions that cannot happen in nature. And scientists say that. The peer-reviewed journals say this could not happen through evolutionary processes. DNA chromosomes were fused, genes were added, genes were taken away, tweaks were made to connect our tongue and the jaws of our mouth with certain places of the brain so that we can have complex language. And you will never hear a chimpanzee sing Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven, even though we share 98% of their DNA. And the reason is because something happened 200,000 years ago that is a mystery. And I don't claim to know scientifically. I've got my personal feelings, and I'm still exploring this. But scientifically, I have to say we don't know. And that's the whole point. We don't know, and we will not know until we free our magnificent young scientists from the shackles of an obsolete science based upon false assumptions and allow them to follow the evidence to the story it leads, rather than forcing them to take all of the information and fit it into a pre-existing idea that we know is no longer true. So that's a big statement. That could be a whole conversation, but it brings us to where the transhuman conversation really comes in, because if we are more than an accident of biology, if we're more than purely random mutations, then it makes sense that we would have the internal technology, the soft technology, to transcend whatever it is that nature brings to us, because we're wired to adapt in those ways. The transhumanism, if we embrace transhumanism, how much of our ability to adapt do we give away? How much do we lose? And that is a question that scientists, I have to tell you, I'm on the scientific bulletin boards, and they're asking this question. If we embrace the technologies that help us to excel in one narrow place, and we lose the biology that has always done that in the past, how much of ourselves are we now giving away? How does that influence our ability to adapt down the road? And the answer is we don't know. We don't know.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think also just in this period of time that we're in right now, that this is, people are thinking about this. They're thinking about the vaccines. They're thinking about, people have a lot of fears around vaccines.
Yeah.
Can
we talk about that a little bit?
Sure, let's talk about it.
Yeah, well, I want to be really clear on where I am not anti-vax at all. And the reason is because the vaccines mimic what we already do in our bodies. Back in the 1950s, 60s, I had vaccines that were available at that time. They're different than the vaccines that are coming out right now. And they were effective. Right now, there are new platforms that we have never used before. And that's where the concern comes from. So what I would say is I'm happy that vaccines are there for people that feel that they need the vaccines and that are compromised in some way so that their bodies cannot do what we're designed to do. For most of us, however, I think that our bodies know what to do. And the question is, for me personally, it comes down to love. Tegan, do we love ourselves enough to live our lives in a way and to give our bodies what they need to be at their best? And that delves into social conversation, to cultural conversations about the kinds of foods in certain cultures, about the lifestyles. Those are very, very delicate conversations, but it's up for us right now because our lives are at stake.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think I'd love to talk about interconnectedness between humans and the environment as well. Sure. You talk a lot about how we, something that I think is really interesting that you talk about is that it seems that you don't really believe in finite resources, or maybe you do believe in certain finite resources, but you believe that we have an agile, agile enough brains and ways of going about using different technologies that we don't need to worry about scarcity as a species. Maybe I'm putting words in your mouth. So
Oh, I'm not sure. Are you, it depends on what resources. Are you talking about energy? You're talking about food? Are you talking about intellect? I'm not sure where you're going with that.
So let's just talk about, it's a little bit of a different topic, but let's talk about climate change and the environment for the moment. So we live in a time where scientists are telling us that we need to change the way that we're treating the environment, or we're not going to have one in a few years. And well, I mean, I know you have a lot of thoughts about this, so I'll let you run with that topic.
Yeah, well, you know, it's a delicate, this is a question. Do we love ourselves enough to be truthful, honest, and factual about our experience? There's a thinking in the world out there, Tegan, and I've seen it in my lifetime, that it's okay to lie about what's happening if the ends are met that people feel are going to justify that lie. Climate change is very deep and delicate for me. So I'm going to begin. We need to stop burning fossil fuels. Absolutely. We need to go clean, green, and sustainable. Now, we have had the technology to do that for over 70 years. For over 70 years, we've had the technology to create energy abundantly using zero fossil fuels, creating zero greenhouse gases in a way that is inexpensive, that makes energy available to every home of every family in the face of the earth that wants that energy. And this is how I know that many of the powers that be are not serious about the climate change, because their money has become involved in this. Now, as a scientist, when I go back, I'm facing the same questions you all are. And I said, okay, I'm a scientist. So what does Mother Earth tell us? What's Earth's story? And I went into the ice cores that are the best record. We have multiple places to get records. The tree ring data only goes back about 2,000 years. So and it doesn't really tell much about temperatures. Tree rings are good for moisture and humidity, but it can indicate, but not so much for temperatures. But the ice cores go back over 420,000 years from Antarctica. And then we have comparable ice cores in Greenland. So from both ends of the planet. And what the ice cores clearly tell us is that humans did not cause climate change. And that's a lie to say that we're the cause. It's very disingenuous, and it's causing a lot of guilt, and it is causing a division in families and communities. And it's empowering very well-intentioned people to do violent acts based upon the lie that they have been told. If it's true that we caused it, I could see some of the thinking. But what the ice cores tell us, Tegan, very clearly, and you can peer-reviewed science, you can go into my books, you can go into the journal Nature, you know, and look at these. And we knew this, we've known this for a long time, that the climate change was happening before humans appeared. Humans appeared 200,000 years ago, and the same rhythms of warming and cooling were happening before humans appeared. And we know that it is directly linked to Earth's location in space in three movements: the tilt, the angle, and the wobble. It's called the Milankovitch cycles. So we know that, and real scientists know that, not pop scientists. And not science has been hijacked by politics, by religion, by corporations, big time. And science can only serve us if we keep science honest. So I'm not a denier that climate change is happening. That's the whole point. It is happening, and I've been saying that for 30 years. We need to adapt to the climate change. It's more of a problem if we deny that it's happening, and we try to live at the way we've always lived in the presence of a changing climate. So people build their homes on a floodplain or power lines above the ground in the presence of ice storms that are stronger because of climate change that are going to wipe them out every year. That's the climate denying right there. So yeah, we could go on with this. I do have strong feelings about it. We didn't cause it. We're adding to it. And we need, whether that's happening or not, it all goes back to our relationship Okay, so another point is that the media is focusing on the climate change is the one and only big problem. And what the science is telling us clearly is that there are 9 parameters that are called the safe zone for planet Earth that must be boundaries, they're planetary boundaries that must be intact for us to live our lives and to life as we've known it. Climate is only one of those. And it's the one all the energy is being focused on. And it is not the one that we have crossed on the boundaries. We've crossed 3 of those 9 planetary boundaries, and climate is not the one that is on the radar right now, but it's the one that's in vogue. All right. Species, we're losing biodiversity. We're losing biodiversity faster than we can track it. And we are off the charts on this is from Rockstrom out of you're probably familiar with the studies, and it's in my book, and we talk about in the programs, biodiversity. And nobody's talking, very few people, maybe in your circle and my circle, but very few people are talking about this. The phosphates and the nitrogen cycle are totally, messed up right now. The acidification of the oceans. So these are aspects of the boundary that are not being acknowledged. And they're all, rather than focusing on one, we need to look at the whole. It's all important. It all matters. We live in this very delicate harmony. Some people like to talk about balance. It's really not a balance. It's a harmony.
Yeah.
And our actions are upsetting that harmony. And I think this is what we're coming to terms with. Climate is one piece. We didn't cause it. We're contributing to it. And if we were serious about it, we have had the technology to remedy that for a very long time. And I think it's time we bring those technologies forward, personally.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Does that make sense?
Definitely. We have a flurry of people writing in to the chat.
Well, I have to say to you, I'm not sure. I know we started late because of the technology. I've got another interview in 6 minutes.
Okay, well, we can wrap it up.
No, and we could do a lot in 6 minutes. Let's do the lightning round, and I'll go right up to that 6 minute mark because I love our audience. We started late, and I really appreciate the time with you, Tegan. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think people want to go back to the COVID vaccine because people are writing in. A lot of people are writing in the chat right now. Can in bold letters, they're all like, please ask him again. My understanding of what you were saying about the vaccine is that this isn't new technology and that you shouldn't be afraid to take it if you feel that your body.
I didn't say that.
Okay.
I didn't say that. So I don't think we should be afraid of anything. What I'm saying is, number one, all of the external technology, including vaccines, mimic what we already do in our bodies. The internet mimics what we do in our bodies. Every cell in our body is a resistor, it's a transistor, it's a gated circuit. It receives information, it transmits information. We emit photons, we receive photons. We store memory. All of our technology mimics what we already do. There's a whole conversation that we can have about that, except we do it better. We have been here for 200,000 years, and our bodies have embraced this ability that we have for 200,000 years. There are 3 platforms of vaccines that are being offered right now. 2 of them are experimental, and those are the 2 that are in the news and being made available right now. The platform that you're hearing the most of is mRNA, and there are 2 companies, Pfizer and Moderna, that are piloting that technology. The second platform is a DNA base. You're hearing a little bit less about that. And the third platform is attenuated virus. This is what I had back in the 50s when I was a kid. It's where you weaken the virus or you kill it and put a very small amount into your body, and then your body recognizes that and develops the antibodies. That is the one that we're hearing the least. It's going to take the longest to develop because of the way that it has to be developed. So even in the scientific literature, there is a lot of controversy about the vaccines that are out there, and the reason is because they're so new. So the questions that are being asked cannot be answered. Questions, what are the long-term effects? The answer is, truthfully, we don't know. They think it's probably okay. but it's not been around long enough for anyone to know. So what I said, I'm not anti-vax if we need that. And if someone feels that they need that, I think we all owe it to ourselves to do our own research, to do due diligence and find out don't listen to the mainstream news. Go to British Medical Journal, go to Lancet Medical Journal, go to the scientific journals and see what the scientists themselves are saying, and ask yourself if you feel that you need that. If someone needs it, what I said was, I'm glad that the technology is there for people that feel that they need it. And for people that, if you're relatively healthy, I think it's a very personal decision. It really is. And it's a longer conversation that we can do justice to in this platform. But
Well,
I think it's a really personal decision, and it's scary, Tegan. Here's the thing, it's scary. It's scary because of the way that we're being informed about what's happened. And it all goes back to our story. This is why our story is so important. So I would never say that it's bad. I don't know that. I'm not going to say it's good. I don't know that. I'm going to say there are a lot of unknowns. And if someone feels they need that support, it's available. And I would check out the statistics of what's happening with people that are taking the vaccines. How many are having allergic reactions? How many are having even worse reactions? And what are those reactions like? And what are the underlying factors that are leading to those reactions? Ultimately, it's a personal choice. And what it comes down to for me is what we just said. Do we love ourselves enough to live our lives in a way, nourish our bodies, give our bodies what they need to be at their best? And I think our answer to that question informs not only vaccine, but a lot of the way that we go about healing our bodies.
Yeah.
Does that make sense if I say it that way?
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. And I think I'd love to just end on, maybe something that feels a little bit actionable for people from maybe even like an interconnectedness, because that's kind of the theme of our moment of choice and a lot of the work that you do. Is there anything that you could recommend as we come out of COVID and out of being isolated from each other that you feel could promote the global interconnectedness?
Well, here's the thing. I think what's happening is we've all gone into this year plus of separation, of isolation, and our world changed. And I think we have to be truthful, honest, and factual with ourselves. We cannot go back to the world that existed in January of 2020 because that world doesn't exist. There's a new world that's emerging. But here's the opportunity, and I think this is where the connectedness comes in. There's a new world emerging. It's not here yet. And the new world is based upon the choices that we're making right now. In the past, we've been conditioned to place the values that we cherish on the back burner in exchange for money, security, and economies. We can't possibly know what's going to happen in the future. I don't have a crystal ball. I have ideas, but I don't know for certain. Nobody can. So here's where I think the unity comes in, Tegan. If we bring to the front burner the values that we cherish as individuals, as families, as communities, as a society, as a nation, as a planet, if we very, very clearly bring those values forward and we make every choice, every policy that is enacted, every law that is embraced, the way that we choose to move forward, if we make those values the centerpiece of those laws and those policies, I think we can't go wrong. So the question that brings us together is, what are our shared values? And I know we have a lot of them. Community is a shared value, and it's being denied right now because of the lockdowns. Creativity, imagination, these are values. Life itself, freedom itself. These are all, and everyone can pitch in their own. We've got to identify the values that we cherish. And this is what brings us together and say, these are important to us. And these are more important than the things that used to dictate the way we live our lives in the past. These values are what we want our policies to be built around and our laws to embrace. And I think if we can honor those most cherished values, Tegan, we can't go wrong with the choices that we make. I'm working with the Evolutionary Leadership Group. We've got input into the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And this is part of our message to the UN. The goals, beautiful goals, but can we honor our most cherished values as we strive to achieve those goals? And that's where the evolutionary leadership community comes in.
Great, thank you. That's a great note to end on, and I'll let you run to your next talk. But thank you so much for joining us today. It was amazing to have you. And also thank you to our Moment of Choice and to to the whole Beyond Words publishing team for helping us bring this together. And we'd love to have you back again. It was great talking to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Tegan, for this first time we've worked together, and thank you for your trust. I want to thank our community, everybody that's watching. We're going through a tough time, and I just want to thank everybody for doing their best to be the best version of yourself, to create the best world possible. And we need everyone. And I'm just going to acknowledge many of the topics that we touched on, they're very deep, probably beyond what we can do justice to in a brief conversation, but hopefully we've given some powerful insights so people can go and research for themselves and find out what, what the new discoveries are showing us.
I hope so. Thank you so much.
All right, Tegan, I look forward to our next. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining.